First, it is time to start the meeting. We have also formed a quorum. And I'll call to order the sixth special meeting of the Finance Committee. The time will run from 2 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. in 3 sessions. The purpose of special FC meetings is to scrutinize the estimates for the year 2015-16 to make sure that the funds requested by the administration will not exceed what is needed for implementing the policies. Depending on the number of members wishing to speak, I will design the time limit. For those who would like to ask questions, please press the button to request to speak. I would like to remind members that the questions to be asked must be directly related with the estimates. If you would like to follow up on any written reply, please quote the reply serial number in the top rightmost corner. Say, for example, EDB 001. If there isn't time, you may ask supplementary written questions or raise them in a panel meeting. Here, I would like to talk about education. I would like to welcome the Secretary for Education and his team. Mr. Ng, we've already got a full copy of your speech, so please keep it succinct. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members. The government is determined to invest in education. The estimated total expenditure on education for 2015-16 amounts to $79.3 billion, which is $5.2 billion or 7% higher than the 2014-15 revised estimate. Of this total, 90% or $71.4 billion is recurrent expenditure, accounting for more than 1/5 of the total recurrent government expenditure and taking up the largest share among all policy areas. It represents an increase of $3.2 billion or 4.7% over the 2014-15 revised estimate of recurrent expenditure. Since the inauguration of the current term government, the recurrent expenditure on education has increased from $60.4 billion in 2012-13 to $71.4 billion in 2015-16, representing a cumulative increase of 18%. As regards the resources on students, the student unit cost of aided primary schools has increased by about 20% from $44,451 to $52,850 in 2015-16, while the corresponding figure for aided secondary schools has increased by about 35% from $49,000 to $66,000. Since the return of Hong Kong to China in 1997, the overall student population has dropped by over 20%. This notwithstanding, the resources the government puts into education increase rather than decrease over the years, with a cumulative increase of over 90% in recurrent education expenditure. Will continue to implement various measures conducive to the development of schools, teachers, and students. More than 10 initiatives have been introduced in the policy address of last year. This year, policy address has announced several new measures as well. In the 2015-16 budget, resources are provided to take forward the new measures announced in this year's policy address and continue with the program set out in last year's policy address. These measures and programs include enhancing the voucher value under the pre-primary education voucher scheme, progressively increasing the ratio of graduate teacher posts in public sector primary schools, further strengthening the mainland exchange programs for primary and secondary students, progressively increasing senior year undergraduate places of university grants committee-funded institutions, implementing the Hong Kong Scholarship for Excellence scheme, subsidizing students to pursue designated self-financing undergraduate programs on a pilot basis, launching the 4th strategy on information technology in education, implementing the pilot program on promoting Hong Kong mainland sister school exchanges, and strengthening support for needy students, students with special education needs, and non-Chinese speaking students, augmenting life planning and vocational education, and promoting the qualifications framework. We have already provided detailed information explanations on the above and other measures when giving a written replies to over 600 questions asked by members during the exercise of the special meeting of the Finance Committee. I must convey my special thanks here to all my colleagues for their relentless, arduous work over the past few weeks. Today, my colleagues and I will be happy to answer further questions from members. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 4 minutes each for questions and answers. First, Mr. Wong Kwok Hing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got 2 questions, and they are related to the new initiatives. The first one is about EDB 200, and that's about the graduate teachers in aided primary schools. The ratio hasn't reached 50%. Why is it so? For 2015 to 16, we have been told that there will be effective measures, hoping that in 3 years' time, the graduate teacher posts can reach a ratio of 65%. So reaching the target gradually. Please tell us about the timetable. That's the first question. The second question is also about another new initiative, and that's about life planning. May I refer to EDB 199, and that's in relation to the VTC. For the year 2012-2013, full-time vocational education has been provided with 17,399 graduates. But then, upon graduation, for those taking a job in the related sector, there were only 41% of them, 7,203. In other words, over 10,000 of the graduates did not find a job in the relevant sector. Does it mean that the VTC courses cannot tie in with the needs of the relevant sectors, so that it is not corresponding to the needs of the sectors, and so there's a huge difference? Moreover, many industries are saying that they are finding it hard to recruit staff. So for the vocational courses offered by the VTC, does it mean that we need an overall and thorough review? Two questions here. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Wong. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the two questions, in a moment, I will invite the DS to give an answer. But basically, I would also like to answer part of the questions. For the graduate teacher posts, yes, the school authorities and the teachers would like to make good use of the quota. However, as a result of the need to have sufficient time for the establishment to be achieved and for the retirement to take place, we have to wait for it to materialize. We hope that we can reach the target of 65% in 3 years' time. For the second question about life planning and the VTC, in fact, over 50 to 60% of them can find a related job. And if you turn to the university graduates, sometimes you may not be able to find a job in exactly the same profession that you have taken a study, but usually it is in an associated job. So maybe DS4 can answer the question. It is our plan that starting from 2015-16, for the aided primary schools, for the ratio of graduate teacher posts, we would like to raise it from 50% over 3 years' time, gradually to 65%. In other words, in the year 2015-16, the graduate teacher posts will be increased from 50% to 55% in aided primary schools, in 16-17 up to 60%, and then in the year 2017-18 up to 65%. So over 3 years' time. In the meanwhile, we hope that we can have close liaison with the schools so that we can urge them to make good use of the resources so that appropriate teachers will be invited to fill the posts. Dr. Kiki Kwok, Mr. Chairman, our Secretariat has made a comparison between Hong Kong and Singapore in relation to education-related resources. We are spending more and more money on the infrastructure, like the airport. But for us, in the areas of education and healthcare, we are spending a substantially smaller amount of money than Singapore. The Secretary went on duty visits all the time, so you must know it. And what is worse is that even for the bill picked up by the parent, now for every $100 spent by the government in the past, the parents would spend $34. Nowadays, $43. What does this show? It shows that you may very well say that you invest in education, but in fact it is just a mess. For many middle-class parents, they have to be comfort frugal, and they try to save up on other expenditure so as to leave behind sufficient money to send their children to DSS schools. But then for many direct subsidy scheme schools and international schools, they aren't really the choice schools of the parents. They just have no choice. Secretary, are you ashamed of yourself? So I don't think you are meeting the aspirations of the parents. Now, of course, you always try to compare Hong Kong with Singapore, but please leave the post. For sub-degree courses, it is hopeless as far as articulation with senior years is concerned. What is worse is that we have to use CCF to have resources for special education. But in fact, the government should take care of children with special educational needs. Now, the government would just resort to the Community Care Fund, but there isn't a supporting policy. Secretary, don't you think that you are ashamed of yourself? Secretary, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Member, for your question. When we look at the figures, I think we need to take a comprehensive view, and we need to be realistic, and we have to move with the times. Just a few years ago, I met with a number of officers in charge of the Ministry of Singapore. Now, 20% of the GDP spent on education. For us, 18%, or 20% of the budget on education, 3.1% of the GDP on education. For us, 18% and 3.4% of the GDP. We hope that we can have free kindergarten education for Singapore. They are just making a start, so views are different in different places. Just now, I was trying to emphasize that we would like to take into account our capability and the realistic needs and the conditions of the society to launch our policies and initiatives. So for the 8 broad directions that I have referred to, that's the basis of our philosophy. If I may interrupt, what about SEM? You would like to dump it with the CCF. Why are you being so irresponsible? For the CCF portion, in the past we did have the experience that after launching it for 3 years, a program will become regularized. Ms. Claudia Mo. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The education system in Hong Kong has failed. The worst point is that students cannot learn English well, and that's why parents have to send their children to international schools or overseas. What's the purpose? Just to enable their children to have a good standard of English. So for the ethnic minorities, you spend less than $6 million to help them to learn Chinese. But then for the NET scheme, you are spending $800 million. We have had an opinion survey to tell us that half of the Hong Kong people would like to spend the money on training up our local English teachers. For native English-speaking teachers, for elite schools, it is just something extra. It is like a bonus. But then for other schools, it isn't effective. Secretary, do you know about education? Every time I go to schools to give a talk, I would always ask the same question. I want to know whether they find the NET scheme effective or not. I've been told that it isn't really so. For local English teachers, if they teach the alphabets, we say that A for Arsenal, and it's the name of a football team. And then we have also got the police headquarters in Arsenal Street. I think we can do it easily and have it interesting. So we are spending $850,000 for a net teacher in a secondary school. But then what about our local English teachers? My understanding is that it will only cost us $400,000 to $500,000 per teacher. So you're having one school, two systems for English teachers. But the end result is that the children can't master English well. So it is outrageous. For this kind of money, I think I have to say that it is laughable for you to say that you are determined to invest in education. It is a wastage because the outcome is not proportionate to your input.
Well, learning English well is a very important factor for the future of our next generation, our children. Secretary, please don't give us such an answer. I was talking about NET scheme. It's not good value for money. Please don't waste our money. Please do something that will not fail our parents. That would just do justice to our parents. Secretary, I know that there were 2 rounds of discussion at the education panel concerning the policy and the arrangement on net teachers. Maybe I should now invite DS3 to say something about teachers. Well, he hasn't say anything in response to my question for the entire 30 seconds. That's nonsense. We have different measures to help our students learn English, and a net teacher is one of them. What we want to achieve is that in a more natural environment, I asked whether they are going to use the funding for training local teachers. Mr. Gary Fang is reply number 248. And that is, we are seeing more and more non-local students in post-secondary degree courses. It's an increase from 68% to 77%. Now for this year, it's 79.7%. What will the administration, what will the Education Bureau to address the problem that there are fewer and fewer postgraduate, local postgraduate students? And also under 044, the pilot scheme on teaching Chinese in the medium of Putonghua would end this year. Are you going to launch this in full scale? And then next, reply 249. In the 2014-2015, the number of students approved by UGC is that in 2016-2017, more places will be given to local students admitted to UGC degree programs. But now it's only 99.8% for this year. Even for the overall enrollment figures allowed, local student numbers are still below what is approved. So the Education Bureau is only shifting the figures. Although the local students are getting a 4% increase in the number of in the quota, it's still a very small number to satisfy the needs of local students. Well, I will say something first before I invite my colleague to supplement. When we talk about research, postgraduate taught degrees and research degrees, there are taught programs and there are research programs. Most of the taught programs, postgraduate students are local. It's the common phenomena. It's not unique to Hong Kong. There are more overseas students in the research, postgraduate research degree programs. I'll give you a lot of time. with regard to the research degrees, it's under a different policy vis-a-vis the bachelor degree programs. We would provide sufficient number of undergraduate places for local students. So that means you have no policy for increasing the places for local research programs. All right. Next, promoting the teaching of Chinese language with Putonghua. The pilot has ended, but we have professional teams to help schools to do this, to promote the teaching of Chinese with Putonghua. And there are also mainland academics coming to help our schools. Would there be further consultation on this? We have a researcher conducting the review, and also we also ascertain the views of schools, their wishes, the wishes of schools. 249。
局長喺度遊花園。下一位係鄧家彪議員。
Mr. Chen Ka-piu. We have been striving to achieve the objective of providing 15 years of free and universal education, and we know that as the first step, you are going to provide free half-day kindergarten education, and it's said that for the time being, you cannot do this for whole-day kindergarten education. And we're talking about 30,000 kindergarten pupils. Well, there's a high demand for full-day kindergarten education. If you look at the number of pupils enrolled in new towns and in districts nearer to the boundary. So why have you ignored their needs? You are just providing a subsidy for half-day kindergarten education, but not full-day education. You say you are going to provide fee remission for needy families. From the reply, I noticed that after deducting the value of the free primary education voucher, they will have to pay 17,000. That's after fee remission. How many of them can afford this? So their wish is dashed. Their hope is dashed. Now that they are not going to get free kindergarten education. These families have two working parents, so you cannot really help these families. Mr. Tang, we haven't really implemented the 15-year free and universal education system. Secretary, we have 180,000 kindergarten pupils. Some 70% are attending half-day kindergartens, half-day sessions. Well, the different modes have served different functions. We are not going to ignore any one of them or some of them. We just want to start with half-day kindergarten education in our scheme. The committee is already looking at other related issues or other means whereby we can provide more support. And also we should encourage more kindergartens to provide whole-day places. So we would use different means to provide the necessary support. We're not ignoring any part of our kindergarten education. Of course, the fee remission mechanism is one that needy families can enjoy access to, and of course they can have a choice. They can choose which kindergarten to send their children to. According to the statistics, half of these families cannot enjoy any fee remission. It's a burden So how can you introduce the so-called 15 years of a free and universal education system in Hong Kong without helping these families? If you look closer at the fee remission scheme, apart from full waiver, we also have half fee remission or 3/4 fee remission. So there are other also beneficiaries under other levels of subsidy. But the fact remains that half of them are not eligible. Reply number EDB 004. I think the Secretary expects this from me. You have just returned from Canada. Well, please tell us how many overseas trips have you made since you assumed your office? I haven't counted. That's done according to needs. This is the 24th visit that you have made, Secretary. Do you know altogether how many days have you been absent? I think you would say that you haven't counted. I would say that 80 days. 20 days are my private leave days. Well, you have been touring around the world in 87 days, costing us $1.8 million. And you haven't been able to make the right count. In the middle of the question, I asked a question about attendance at our electrical meetings and committee meetings and so on and so forth. In 2013-2014, electrical year 2013-2014, education panel of this council convened 12 meetings, only 12 meetings. For the first one is for the election of chairman and deputy chairman. There's no need for the secretary to attend. And he said he attended 13 such meetings. But actually, it's 11. So I'm a bit puzzled that you tell us that you have attended 13, when in fact you have just attended 11. All right, you have been touring the different places around the world in 87 days. I think the public would be interested to know whether you are interested in your job or interested in traveling around the world. Next, reply 240. This is about tertiary education institutions and the quota for non-local students. I want to know how many places have been given to non-locals instead of locals. You have been avoiding the question. I'm talking about local students who are eligible for admission to tertiary institutions in Hong Kong, and how many places have been taken away from them. I would like to ask DS1 to give a reply. Thank you. Our 4% in, 16% out policy means that we have a quota, a cap on non-locals. It has no direct relationship with the admission of local students. It's just that we allow institutions to enroll. Additionally, 4% of students in the total, and that would be subsumed under the total of 14,500 allowed. So non-locals do not take away the places for locals. It's the additional 4% quota. This is not correct. Next, Dr. Helena Wong. I have a few questions. First, 202 and 210. For the sister school scheme, the $200 million will be allocated. Are you talking about two ways? or are you just giving money to local students for going to the trips going to the mainland? Would those mainland school groups coming to Hong Kong be funded by Hong Kong? 207. Would you consider a voucher scheme for assisting the post-secondary students? The answer is no. You are just only providing support or assistance for 1,000 students on self-finance programs. There are 46,689 such students. You only subsidize 1,000 of them, and the other will get some indirect subsidy. I have a question about Annex C on the fees. So local parents have to pay such fees. And the fees charged can be as high as 50 to 90,000. You're not subsidizing. You're not providing subsidized places for local students, but for the research, postgraduate research programs, 78 or 80% of them are non-locals, and you are subsidizing all these postgraduate students. Are you going to recover the cost of providing such postgrad programs, or they should be asked to pay higher fees vis-a-vis local postgraduate students?
Secretary, if I may answer one of the questions first, that's about the subsidies. 1,000 places. This is but one of the many new initiatives that we have launched. Please take a look. Well, if we're talking about locally accredited courses, they may get a loan, they may also get a bursary. That's the sort of subsidy given. It will be difficult to compare it with the research postgraduate programs because the target is different. For local students, if they're interested in those courses, in fact, they stand a very high chance of being admitted. In the case of sister schools, I would like to ask DS4, Mr. Tang, to give an answer. Mr. Tang. For sister schools, for the year 2015-16 onwards, we would like to have a 3-year program on a pilot basis. Under the pilot basis, we are going to fund our aided schools, including DSS schools. The purpose is to enable schools to be given financial assistance so that Hong Kong schools and mainland schools which have already formed sister school partnership to have professional exchanges. For the details, we hope that we can inform the schools ASAP. The purpose of the money is to assist the schools so that there will be a chance for professional exchange. What about mainland scholars and teachers coming south? Will they be subvented as well? Our target recipients will be local schools. So if the subsidy can enable exchanges between mainland and Hong Kong schools, then the money can come from this sum. Mr. Yip Kin Yun. Yes, I would like to ask a question about this. EDB 052, if I may refer to the third part of Annex 2. That's about the sister school scheme. I understand that you are going to spend $290,000 this year for this purpose. Now, we have been told clearly that there will be an entrustment service, and that's the Hong Kong Federation of Education Workers. My first question is, why is it that you would like to get some organizations to do the work for you? And in fact, we have got 2 items here, and both of them are being carried out by the Education Bureau itself. So a lot of exchange sessions with the mainland schools and mainland educational authorities. A lot of liaison will be expected. So those two other items were carried out by the Education Bureau. How come that for the sister school partnership you would like to contract it out? If you need to contract it out, how come that almost for 10 years' time you're having the same organization doing it for you? Have you invited some other interested organizations to bid for the service, and what is the criteria for getting this particular one? And for the coming year, there will be a substantial increase in the amount of money involved. By how much? And are you still going to contract it out to this particular organization? Will it be one organization only? I would like to ask Mr. Tang to answer the question. Mr. Tang, please. Well, we have had the experience of a number of years to have the sister school partnership between mainland and Hong Kong schools. We'd like to entrust it with an organization to do it for us for a number of reasons. First of all, we would like to take into account the interests or the requests of local schools, and we want to match local schools with mainland schools. And participating schools have told us that they are interested to join, but then they find it hard to find the contacts. And therefore, we would like to contract out the service so that we can facilitate the partnership work. I hope he can be more focused in the answer. Why is it not carried out by the Bureau itself? Because the Bureau can certainly do it, since you're involved in other projects as well. If it can facilitate our work, then we'll try to contract it out. Secondly, we are getting this service, and when we procure this service, we have been following the government practices in getting quotations before we award it to the bidder. In the future, when we launch the sister school partnership, we are going to have something similar. Has there been any open tender? We have been following the government's procurement practices, and we have openly invited interested organizations to bid for the service contract. Mr. Tam Yu Chung, for that question asked by Mr. Yip Kin Yun, I think he should have declared interest. He represents the PTU, so it's better if he can declare interest. If I may go to reply number 122. And that's about support given to the NCS students to learn Chinese. It appears that the government has given $12.3 million. However, for the number of NCS students taking part, it seems that the interest isn't that keen, only 6%, 494 only, and 61 kindergartens took part. In other words, it seems that the response isn't that good. I want to know why is it so, and have you got any measures to encourage more to take part? Secretary, thank you, Mr. Tam. Thank you, Chair. Indeed, we hope that there will be more students taking part. I'd like to ask Dr. Chen, DS5, to answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 400 plus students. They are all from secondary schools. For primary schools and junior secondary students, they've also got other forms of support. But then for this particular one, it is more specific. At the kindergarten level, the best way to learn a language is by way of immersion. And therefore, for the 60 kindergartens, they think that they need a specialized service, and that's why we've got 60 kindergartens joining the scheme. Mr. Tam Yu Chung. Question 2470. EDB 184. And that's about the school nets and also the number of subsidized primary school places. Now, for schools near to the boundary, there is a very keen demand for the school places. And that's why there is a shortage of school places. I understand that you try to enlarge the class size to cope with the demand. Currently, other than districts near to the boundary having such a problem, in the Eastern District, in Kuntong District, there is also a very severe shortage of school places. Why is it so, and what is your countermeasure? Thank you. I would like to ask Ms. Wong to give an answer. Ms. Wong. Well, according to the latest information, the demand for primary 1 school places as a result of the type 2 babies we will reach a peak in 2018 and then it will come down. As to the demand in individual districts, it all depends on parental choices. In a particular school year, there may be an imbalance between demand and supply. Well, our consensus with the educational sector is that when we see a variation from year to year, we'll be flexible. We'll make use of vacant classrooms or vacant school premises to increase the number of classes. And if necessary, there will be temporary measures. He mentioned Kuntong, and in fact, 2 time-limited vacant school premises will be made available to provide school places to cater for the school year 2015-16. What about the Eastern District on the Hong Kong Island? Is there a problem as well? We don't think that it is serious when compared with other districts. There's no need to resort to such special measures. Dr. N. Zhang. I would like to refer to the third point in the speech of the Secretary. He has said that since the return of Hong Kong to China, the overall student population has dropped by over 20%. But then the expenditure on education has increased rather than decreased, and in fact an increase of over 90%. I can confirm that this is indeed the case. For education, health, and welfare, I think we used to have more or less the same share in the past, that is 22%. But now we know that for health, it accounts for 16% only. But for you, in education, more than 20%. And the cumulative increase since return to China, over 90%. It doesn't matter we are rich, and it doesn't matter if we spend more money to invest in the education of our young. But then is it effective? We have heard that, generally speaking, the society are complaining that our students have a poor standard of English, poor standard of Chinese, and they don't have a strong knowledge base of history. And then students are also complaining that the tuition fees are very expensive. They pay a lot to study, but then they incur a debt, and then they can't find a job to repay the loan, and so they would rather default on the student loan. And teachers are also unhappy. And we have got lecturers, teachers, a lot of them here in this chamber. Many of them are not happy, say for members on that side. So what is the crux of the matter? What has gone wrong? This is particularly the case at universities. For each undergraduate, we are sort of spending over $1 million to educate an undergraduate. Last year, there was the Occupy movement. These undergraduates have been provoked by their teachers, lecturers, and they took to the street to air their grievance. So what's gone wrong? Do we need an overall review, or it doesn't matter, or you just have a year of the review, or what? Or is it that we haven't been fair to the teachers, to the students, to the schools, or perhaps, as Professor Arthur Lee has said, we have to find out why our universities have seen a fall in the ranking? Is it because some university lecturers are not focusing on their core business? So I think we need to find out why this has cropped up.
Well, taxpayers don't mind funding their education, but it seems that our universities are not getting better. We talk about the next generation. There's just like a blank piece of paper. You paint a picture and they become the picture. And now they seem to favor yellow. Some put a yellow piece of paper on their head in some events. Secretary, perhaps it's time to conduct a serious review and find out what has happened. Why do we have so many problems? Well, we have done a lot since the return of Hong Kong to China. Instead of 9 years of free and universal education, it's now 12 years. And we didn't have the voucher scheme. Now we have a voucher scheme. The biggest challenge is managing expectations nowadays. Mr. Chan Chi-Chin, do you know, Chairman, if you search the name Mr. Eddie Ng Hak Kim, if you use Google to search Mr. Eddie Ng Hak Kim, what would you find? You'll find overseas tours. So that brings me to my number, EDB001. I asked this question of all bureaus. Yesterday, the Security Bureau and the police just said there were 7 such visits. And they used one sentence to tell us the purpose of such visits. And now Mr. Ng has told us in a lot of breakdown information. And sponsorship from Overseas Education Authority is also provided. Perhaps Mr. Ng is very experienced in answering such questions. Perhaps he should give a lecture to other directors of bureau so that they would in the future give us itemized information on all such visits. So may I first of all confirm one thing first. Are you the so-called frequent traveling, the number one frequent travelers among the principal government officials? And it seems that you are more or less equal in terms of visit to the mainland and visits to other countries. So what have you learned from your visits to the mainland? What has the mainland education system inspired you? What can Hong Kong learn from the mainland experience or system? And also in your visits, you have to visit a mainland city for the signing ceremony for sister schools. So in the coming year, can you tell us what your plan for the coming year in relation to such a signing ceremonies for sister schools? And what is the financial budget for such visits in the coming year? Secretary? Well, such duty visits have been planned meticulously, and they all serve particular or specific purposes. And for example, visits to Samjan, resulted in having the Hong Kong style classes provided in Samjan for the children with Hong Kong residency status. We can always learn from other people's practice and experience so that we can develop our policy in a more comprehensive and we can avoid mistakes made by other authorities. And we have a new secondary school qualification, the DSE qualification. We need to make sure that the qualification is widely recognized in the world. So we have to conduct duty visits to liaise with overseas authorities. Many of my questions have not been answered. I hope other members will follow up with more questions. Dr. Fernando Zhang. I want to ask a question about SEN students and support for SEN students. The subcommittee on integrated education of this council has proposed that for schools that admit SEN students, there should be a liaison teacher post. And now CCF is asked to do something, but CCF will only provide assistance to schools which admit students with limited means. So they will look at the financial needs first. But this is not really about helping SEN students. Special education is needed by SEN students irrespective of their financial means. So it's regrettable that you are now taking up the proposal through the CCF. You are going to provide funding for a liaison teacher post. You're only going to provide the midpoint salary of a teacher for this post. How can you engage a senior teacher for this? And if you ask the teacher to do this part-time, then only some of the resources will be made available for SEN students. Do you agree that the resources provided are insufficient? Are you going to regularize this particular arrangement? And only 1/10 of the schools are now benefited from this new arrangement. Are you going to introduce this to all schools in due course? Secretary, as I've explained, we need to gain some experience and we need to know more about the situation on the ground. So that's why we have invited the CCF to launch a pilot scheme for 3 years. I'll defer to my Undersecretary for supplementary information. This is a pilot scheme to introduce a student liaison teacher post. CCF has been invited to fund this as a pilot scheme so that we can know the functions that can be served by such a post holder and what kind of qualifications should be expected from the post holder. More than 100 schools are covered in the scheme. It's more than 1/10 of the total. I believe that the scale is not small, given that it's a pilot scheme. And well, under the scheme, we will have to conduct some sort of means test. That's just for the selection of schools. When the special education liaison of a teacher is deployed to the school, he will be offering assistance to all SEN students and not just SEN students with financial needs. I hope a review can be conducted and the arrangement can be extended to all schools. Next question, EDB 016, Mr. Peter Cheung. Reply number 018019. Life planning. I'm concerned about the progress in this regard. The Education Bureau visited 140 schools in 6 months. That's quite a lot. What are the schools spending the $500,000 of funding I've heard that some of them just employ some clerks. So whether the funding will be fully utilized to serve the purpose depends on how the schools spend the money. I hope we can get I can get a reply in writing. I don't want you to have a reply today. You have provided $200 million for the schools engaged in life planning, and also the HAB has also got hundreds of thousands of dollars for this, and there's another $100 million from the Hong Kong Jockey Club. So I would like to know how are the resources deployed. 019, you're providing 40,000 or 70,000 to teachers to get degree qualifications. Some of the programs would cost 69. For example, you provide 40,000 to those attending Hang Seng Management College. Of course, it's on a reimbursement basis, but for those who are attending other courses, the school fees are different from the funding levels. So how are the funding levels decided? And what if the institutions increase their fees because they know that the students will be subsidized? But this is just the first step. We're providing $500,000 for the first year. We want to make this part of the institution, part of the system, and they would have to utilize other social resources from Hong Kong Jockey Club and other funding organizations. We maintain close liaison with the 50 schools funded by the Hong Kong Jockey Club with a total funding level of $500 million. As for the other questions, I'll ask DS1 to respond. The subsidy is two-tier one, 40,000 and then 70,000. We provide 40,000 for the career or lab based. Otherwise, it's 40,000. Maximum subsidy is 40,000. These institutions would require Education Bureau's approval if they want to increase fees for subsidized programs. I think I should do you justice, Secretary. You are not the so-called #1 frequent traveler in the government. I think Mr. Gratso must have outdone you in this regard. But you are among the top three, I'm afraid. In the past 2.5 years, it's up to January. You have went on 23 duty visits. The lowest cost is $125. And the most costly one is $342,704. Maybe you are more interested in taking up the post of the Secretary for Tourism. We don't have such a post, says the Chairman. I would like you to carefully and meticulously plan for our education development rather than for your duty visits. It seems that you will not give up on any chance to have a tour, to have a duty visit in the coming financial year. Can you tell us how many such visits will be conducted by you? What's the expected cost for such duty visits? Can you tell the committee your estimates?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Member. As I have said, every time when I went out on a visit, it was fully justified, and every time it was closely related to my portfolio. So I won't have in mind as to how many trips to Europe I have planned to say 5 times or 6 times. In fact, it forms as part of my daily work. The question was whether you have any plans. How many trips have you planned, and how much money will be involved out of the practical needs? I haven't. Tomorrow, I have to attend a Shenzhen meeting. Sometimes I have to attend certain functional activities. I have to accompany the CE to go on a particular trip, and there are also work related to universities. Mr. Sin Chung Kai, how would you define? How come that you cannot plan and anticipate how many trips you are going to make? Just now, you have said that all the travel plans were carefully put together. Why can't you carefully put together your yearly plan of travel? As I have said, in particular when the DSE was first launched and whenever we have new initiatives, but then they are implemented in Hong Kong. Are you visiting the local schools, or are you going overseas to implement our new academic structure? If education is purely something local and got nothing to do with the overseas countries, how can we meet with the students' need to have their qualifications being recognized? We need to take a global look when we discharge our functions. Mr. Sin, are you out of breath already? Mr. Dennis Kwok. I would like to go to EDB 107 and 108. Both are about special education. Well, on many different occasions, I have already asked the Secretary and the Undersecretary about the subsidies given to students with special educational needs. Fernando Zheng has already followed up on part of the answers. You haven't answered my question. I want to know, why is it that you are not able to give me the number of students for Tier 1 and Tier 2? You don't need to tell me what is meant by Tier 1 and Tier 2, because I know it. Now, you have said that there might be changes in the middle of the term, but it doesn't mean that that would prevent you from gathering the information. So at the outset of a school term, how many Tier 1, Tier 2 students, how many of them towards the end of the year? If you don't have it, I'm sure schools would have the number. And then for IEP, that is the individual education plan. Again, you have told me that it is impossible for you to give an answer. You need to subsidize the school children. How come that you don't even have this basic information? Thank you. I would like to invite Mrs. Wong, DS3, to answer. Mrs. Wong. Mr. Chairman, we have the 3-tier support system to deal with the needs of the children with special educational needs. We have already given an explanation in our reply. Well, support given to students at different levels, I don't think we can simplify and say it is at Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3. In fact, support given at school and spending time with specialists are different. We hope that as a result of appropriate intervention and support, the needs of the students can be met and they will have their needs changed and their capabilities enhanced. Yes, I do understand. But what about the number of students supported by you at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3? I'm sure you must have a number. If not, how can you carry out your IEP? If you haven't got some basic figures for the IEP, then to me it is impossible, and I can't understand. Mr. Chairman, well, in schools, we provide a lump sum to the schools. And so the basis of our calculation is that we will look at the basic capabilities of the students. So we can't single out the figures. This is because when schools get resources from us, it is a learning support grant. It is being given in accordance with the different tiers involved. We have also got an overall element. You need to approve the sum at the beginning of the year. You must have an idea about the number of students, and you know how many at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. If you don't even have such basic information, how can you approve the funding? Mrs. Wong, after the meeting, I can elaborate. In fact, in the reply, we have already said that for students with SEN studying at mainstream schools, we have given you the amount of resources given. And we can break down the figures into Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 so that they know, he knows about the extra resources needed. I think Mr. Kwok was simply asking, you must know the number of students and then you know how much to give them. It seems that you are telling us that you just give a lump sum instead of per capita. So does it mean that you don't care, you don't need to know how many students are involved, you simply give a lump sum amount to them? Even if the school hasn't even got a single student with SEN, you will still give a sum of money to the school. We do have an objective basis for the calculation. Let me emphasize once again, this is part of the support given. If you want to know about the whole picture, I can tell you about the full set of initiatives given to support the schools. Ms. Emily Lau, just now we talked about the quality of education and also the foreign ranking of the universities. He referred to management of expectation. So what does he mean? Is he saying that the community shouldn't expect so much and that's the status quo? I have to declare interest. I'm on the board of directors for the gifted schools. So I want to ask a question about giftedness. In the past, as Eric Ho was involved, and in fact, it seems that you haven't pursued our ideas concerning educating the gifted school children. Now we have got a new permanent secretary for education. Now, if you are indecisive about this matter, then I'm afraid that there will be some interruption. So have you ever given thought to this problem? Thank you, Ms. Lau. We have always emphasized that this is something that we emphasize. Maybe I would like to give the floor to our new permanent secretary. Permanent secretary, thank you. I am also on that committee for gifted children, like Ms. Lau. We certainly understand that for the initial amount of capital injected, it has almost been depleted. It is time to plan for the future. For this matter, well, in fact, the administration has certain initial views. However, it may involve thinking about the availability of resources within the government or whether we need some help from outside. We are now having some internal discussion. In due course, we'll come to the LegCo and share with members our views and we will have input from members. Ms. Emily Lau. Yes, I understand. Please do it in time. Otherwise, it will be caught in the middle. Your policy is not ready and yet the money is depleted. So make sure that you know when you will come. Please tell us when you're coming to the education panel. Within 2015, we're going to submit a paper to the LegCo on this matter. Secretary, what do you mean by management of expectation? Does it mean that we should expect a falling standard of our education? What do you mean, Secretary? For gifted education. No, not about gifted education. It's about education in general. It is related. I think there is a general support, and so there's a basis for support. I'm not worried. We have to do it across the board. It isn't just about working in a year or two. I hope that we can do it on the longer term. In the past, we have been too short-sighted, and the projects were too short-term. Ms. Lau, you were on the committee, so I think you know that it cannot be delivered by having just one or two single projects. Yes, we want to have more support. Like in the case of free kindergarten education, we want you to provide subsidies for the whole day schooling. Mr. Ma Fung Kwok, EDB 160. I have got three parts to my question. The mix of local and non-local students, number of students, etc., etc. But the administration hasn't really answered my question. The administration simply dismisses my question, saying that they haven't got information, and they simply throw a website address to me, asking me to check it up by myself. Now, is it because you haven't got the information, or you haven't got time to collate the information? Or is it because the tertiary institutions don't have to report to you about their relevant information, like the number of students? If it is the first case, then please do it afterwards, because you must have been kept very busy answering so many questions. But then if it is the second case, the latter case, there's no need for institutions to report the information to you. Please justify why you don't need them to report. If that is the case, then what is the relationship between the Education Bureau and the self-financing institutions? Do you simply license them to run the courses and then you don't care at all? Now, we have seen a growing number of complaints. Some of the institutions are abusing the tuition fees, and then the criteria of admission vary a lot, and they are just admitting the students indiscriminately. So all of these are hot topics of concern to the public. If you don't even have the basic information, how can you show concern? How can you respond to it? So please give us the answers. Secretary. First of all, Mr. Low, DS1, can answer the question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To answer Mr. Ma's question, that is why we haven't given the figures asked. This is because for the taught postgraduate programs, well, there are four ways. First of all, we have the UGC institutions. Yes, I know. Of course, I know there are different channels. But how many under each mode? Why don't you answer it? Why can't you answer it? Mr. Chairman, allow me to go on. For self-financing master taught programs, well, there are hundreds of them. Self-financing taught master degree programs, hundreds of them. And then the supervision and the regulatory work is different. Some are under CAP 320. Others are non-local higher education courses, so they're under a different regulatory system. So we can't readily come up with the full picture. That's why in our answer we have said that perhaps the member should go to a particular website to have a view, because on that website, as a result of registration under the Hong Kong Qualifications Register, there will be full information. But of course, they won't make it. They won't sort of have tailor-made information. Rather, they would have QF level 6. In other words, we haven't got any information which is readily available to answer the members' questions specifically.
All
right, if you have the information, you can provide the information after the meeting. The purpose of this committee's meeting is to let us have answers. You have just provided no answer. I don't blame Mr. Edding. He's always nice and polite to me. He has treated me once to tea, and I lost my way because I didn't go to those places frequently. I know he has been working very hard, and now it seems that we are not going to have 15 years of free and universal education after all. CY Leung has told us a lot of nonsense. We were promised by CY Leung that we're going to have 15 years of free and universal education. Now it cannot be done. In the Q&A session, CY Leung said because of the lack of international school places, expats are reluctant to come to work in Hong Kong. But the fact is that because our own education system has failed, many such places in international schools are taken up by local students. You have told us, Secretary, that you have gone on such duty visits to promote our new curriculum for the secondary school sector and the DSE. If you look at the justifications provided in the reply, none is about the new secondary school curriculum. There was one. That's one actually. The one to Canada. On the 27th of January 2013, you went to the UK to attend an education forum. To Australia, you were there to talk about kindergarten education. And another visit to Indonesia. That's in connection with 100 Hong Kong students going there to train, to receive training. You went to the Belgium and Finland to learn from them, to Germany, to Sweden. You were there to conduct a study on the vocational education. So they're not about DSE. And why do you have to visit mainland cities or schools? Sister schools are none of your business. You should appoint an official to chair a particular committee on sister schools. And then that particular official can represent you to attend the ceremonies. You have a difficult job, Secretary. You have to cover so much. Last year, I asked you to visit a kindergarten in Tin Shui Wai. The premises were taken away from the kindergarten operator. Well, it's just a 45-minute trip from Central. Well, you are the Secretary for Education for Hong Kong. You are not an you're not an official. That's for the attending ceremonies. I want to ask questions about EDB 150. It's about liberal studies. This year, the examination asks questions about agricultural problems, and there's a compulsory question on tourism. It seems that the Education Bureau and the Hong Kong EAA are ignoring the problems. Well, the question is about China's agricultural sector. Maybe the liberal study teachers are so knowledgeable, they can also cover such issues. Why don't you ask questions about suicides of netizens and so on and so forth? I have received this message from a candidate saying that they are offered a choice, and the choice is to fail the subject or take the question. That's the choice. Why do we have such questions for liberal studies? Why should there be 3 compulsory questions? What's the problem of making all the questions optional? Why can't they allow to answer other questions? You should ask around whether for secondary students, they should all be able to answer these 3 questions. I hope I can get some concrete answers from the Secretary. And the same questions can be put to the Hong Kong EAA. It said that many teachers insist that such questions should be compulsory. But the Hong Kong EAA and the teachers are service providers. I have sympathy for teachers. Why do you have to make everyone not liking the questions? Why do you have to set such questions for liberal studies? Liberal studies are supposed to be about positive life values. Or should we just offer optional questions, elective questions? Secretary, liberal studies is about learning how to think. It's not content-oriented. The content should cover different disciplines. The design is led by teachers and professors. Maybe I should arrange a meeting with members so that they can give you very detailed explanations. So I think that we should do away with compulsory questions. I have no special preference for language, but we have agreed that we will speak in just one language. Use either Chinese or English. It's fine by me. Just don't use mixed code. Mr. Charles Small. I think Mr. Eddie Ng has given us a very spirited answer to Miss Priscilla Leung's question. I have a question about 174 and 175. That's about the way that the schools have used the funds granted. They said that the Bureau hasn't really collected information on how the funds are utilized. Well, if you did not do this, you should do it from now on, because the Financial Secretary has been talking about strengthening the curriculum on science and technology, and in 175 I asked a question about the promotion of e-textbook. I know time doesn't allow for a very detailed elaboration, and perhaps in the future you should ask the schools to provide returns on how they have utilized the grants or subsidies that you have given them, because by doing this we can gain the full picture, and that's good for future planning. Secretary, time is limited. Can you tell us more about the promotion of the e-textbook, the e-textbook market development scheme? And we are also going to enhance the internet connection system in schools. Would that be helpful in the wider promotion of e-textbooks? Well, e-learning is a complicated system. It has many components and they're interlinked. That's the scheme to provide a better Wi-Fi system in schools. We hope that such infrastructure will be completed within this year. 100 or so schools are embarking on this scheme, and the progress has been good. As for e-textbooks, we don't want the market to be monopolized by major suppliers. So under this scheme, we have two phases. The e-textbooks have been made available in phase 1. Some schools are already using them, and they are already in the progress of making the improvements and refinement. As for this phase, as for second phase, phase 2, where we have done the matching, and the e-education has become a mature platform. It's much more interactive and application oriented. And schools have already embarked on regional collaboration and exchanges. And some schools and e-textbook developers have set programs to do more promotion. Well, there are the brands doing some promotion. For example, Samsung, we would make the best use of resources available to share experience among schools. I have my 4th minutes now. EPP 032, international schools, and the share of local students and non-local students. In many international schools, non-local students account for less than 70% of the total population. I know you have asked these international schools to admit at least no less than 50% of non-locals, but some are falling behind the required threshold. But this is about enrollment. I'll ask Jesse at DS2 to say something about the measures that we have taken. I think all schools have complied with the rules and conditions pertaining to international schools. Beginning from 2007, for international schools and school sponsors which have been granted sites by us, there's the requirement that at least 50% of the student population should be non-locals. That's from 2007. In 2009, the threshold was raised to 70%. That's the existing threshold. And that is to say, if vacant school premises or sites have been granted for these schools, they will have to comply with this condition. For those which are not complying, all of them were not schools that have been granted sites within the time frame that I've just referred to. We have actually allocated 11 vacant school campuses or sites to international schools in the period concerned. Among the 11, one has yet to start operation. The remaining 10 have complied with the threshold of either 50% or 70% of non-local students. Local students and also local parents are more and more interested in international school places. I've declared my interest that I'm a director of a DSS school.
So I just wonder if the Education Bureau would relax the requirements concerning DSS schools to run international curriculum. Mr. Chairman, in the past, we tried to find out more about the circumstances of individual schools and we've rendered support. In the past year or two, we have analyzed the outcome as to whether this should be regarded, this should be adopted as a policy. We would rather listen more to you before we go back to reconsider the case. 7 members would like to ask questions in the second round. Anybody else? If not, then I'm really worried. You try to signal to me that you want 3 minutes. Others may want to have 4 minutes. So, Ms. Lau, 3 minutes. For those who are towards the end of the queue, you may not have the chance to ask questions. Dr. Kenneth Chen, 3 minutes, of course, would not be an adequate amount of time. I just want to share with the Secretary as to what is of great concern to us. Secretary, if you are invited to go overseas to introduce to them our educational system, or if you are invited to give a very important talk, then of course your duty visit is fully justified. However, sometimes we don't see the same. Now, if you think that the lower popularity rating you enjoy and yet you think that the higher you can fly against the law of gravity, then I'm afraid this isn't going to be in the interest of Hong Kong. You have been here for 2.5 years and you went around the world for 87 days. It's time for you to be on solid ground and do something for us instead of going around the world. Mr. Chairman, 20% of the non-local students at the universities are mainly from the mainland. People may think that 20% is entirely outside the quota, but in fact, to our surprise, 40% is within the quota. Now, looking back at the various figures, I think for many years, the institutions have not been able to enroll an adequate number of students to match the approved student numbers. So are they trying to make use of accounting procedures so as to make use of the 4% so as to enable institutions to enroll students who can pay the high levels of fees? So that as a result, instead of having over 10,000, so that we don't have to turn away over 10,000 students every year who meet the requirements and yet they don't get a place. We are not being fair to them. That's the crux of the matter. And that's why I have asked whether it is possible to come up with the calculation to find out how many places have been sacrificed so that AL students, DSG students could meet the minimum requirements and yet could have been turned away. I think that's the crux of the matter. Moreover, for many years, it appears to me that your regulatory work has been very poor. And as a result, the institutions are able to sort of juggle the figures. For business disciplines, is over 20%. After we voice our concern, you are changing your policy. For 20%, it will be entirely outside the quota, and all the disciplines have to follow the requirements, and then it is fair. Dr. Helena Wong, 3 minutes. EDB 269 as well as 270. For EDB 269, there's about the non-local research postgraduate programs. For the figures you have given, less than 1/4 of the research students are local. 63.8% are mainland, and 11% from other places. For the master degree programs and the doctoral degree programs, for the unit course, it is $475,000 a year, or even $500,000 a year. I understand that for anybody studying for an MPhil program, it takes you 2 years, so $1 million. And then for a doctoral degree program, $1.5 million for 3 years. So I want to know whether you would consider recovering the cost from the non-locals, or charging a more expensive or a higher level of tuition fees from the non-locals. You refuse. You have tried to shift our attention. You said that you want them to become teaching assistants. You want them to play a bridging role. You try to divert our attention. They come here to study. They want to get a master's degree. They want to get a doctor's degree. They're students. They are not Hong Kong people, and yet the taxpayers are paying for their education. You only charge them $40,000 a year, just like any other local students. Mr. Lee Kun Yao from Singapore just passed away. Would Singapore do the same to favor those who are non-Singaporeans? Yes, I would like to ask Mr. Low to give an answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your question. Let me clarify once again. For the research program students, for the postgraduate programs, we want to attract research students from all over the world to come to Hong Kong. So it's a merit base, and we don't make a distinction between local and non-local students. I'm talking about subvention. How come that you use public money to subvention so many non-locals? Mr. Low, I'm trying to explain the policy. The purpose is to attract the high-quality, high-caliber researchers. After they have come to Hong Kong, it will be a benefit to the universities, and that's why we don't make a distinction between locals and non-locals. Then you are using educational resources irresponsibly. Many students have to go to a self-financing institution. Upon graduation, they incur a loan of $400,000. Who's going to help them? Mr. Yip, I think Dr. Wong's question should be pursued and followed up. But then I want to turn to my own question, again on the duty visits of the Secretary. The Secretary went on duty visits so frequently. Would you consider asking the Undersecretary to go on your behalf, or one of the Deputy Secretaries or the Permanent Secretary to go on your behalf? I think maybe other officials are more appropriately placed to do the work for you in this regard. So, Secretary, in the previous year, you went on so many overseas trips. I want to know whether each and every one of the trips have to be taken by you and you alone and nobody else. And then for another question, 008, it is said that small class teaching is a policy, is a strategy. and then there will be grouping of students, and it shouldn't be done across the board. But then, as I have said last year, if you say that small class teaching isn't about number, it is about strategies, then if you ask around the world, everybody would be puzzled and don't know what you are talking about. I think last year, Ms. Jessie Wong gave an answer, and the answer was much better. But for this year, the answer is just the same. So I want to know whether the government is saying that the number isn't important when it comes to small class teaching, so that finally it may just become big class or large class teaching, though it has the name of small class teaching. Secretary, I would like to thank the member for his question. First of all, let's take a look at the previous arrangements. I have to go because I have to meet somebody who is at the same level. They are the counterparts. Once I've started something, then maybe my colleagues can go on my behalf. But for the first time, I have to go so as to meet with the counterparts, ministers of the same ranking. Now, teaching by groups is also one of the way to teach. So small class teaching is only one of the pedagogy. And sometimes even the teacher can teach a large class of 100 and still be effective. So are you simply saying that small class teaching isn't about number? Even for a larger class, they can teach in groups. I think the number is indeed key to the question of small class teaching. Fernando Zhang. Dr. Helena Wong has said that for the graduate school, most of the research students are mainland students. It is a case of absurdity. It is odd. You have said that local students may apply and then they won't stand a slimmer chance of getting enrolled. We want to find out why we have given rise to such a development. I think at least the Education Bureau must look into the matter. It also involves the question of why our universities, why our professors like the mainland researchers so much. I think it has been said that it's because such research students can easily help the professors to prepare theses and help with the publication of their writings. We are being so generous to the non-local students. It is indeed something that we need to carry out a review. For the three-tier support systems for the SEN students in integrated education, I would leave it to Mr. Kwok to pursue. It is really mind-boggling for you to say that you can't give us the number of students. I would like to go to EDB 016, and this applied learning for the Chinese language. Now you're saying that in the coming year, only 150 non-Chinese speaking students have enrolled into the course. It is alarmingly small as a number. Can you explain? We have got thousands of NCS students in our secondary schools. How come that you have only got so few of them? 150 only? Is there a problem? Secretary. Thank you, member, for your question. I want to answer the last part of the question first. For applied learning Chinese, it is a new attempt. We need students to apply, and we need to go through curriculum design. And not too long ago, we have announced the details. So we are making a start. 150 have enrolled. More will come forward. So please give us time. Mr. Chairman, but then we've been told that the 23rd of January was already the deadline to enroll. Mr. Dennis Kwok. 3 minutes. The Bureau has already promised to give me further information about support at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. I would like to follow up further on special education, EDB 051. We are told that for NCS students with special educational needs, if I may ask the Bureau, for non-Chinese speaking students with special educational needs, for such students, do you have plans to increase the number of school places and enhance the resources? If yes, can you elaborate? Secretary. Mrs. Wong's DS3. Mr. Chairman, for NCS with SEN, our policy is that we want them to integrate into the school system ASAP. Therefore, in principle, if they go to mainstream schools, there will be extra subsidies on 2 fronts. First of all, as a non-Chinese speaking student, we have the policy to support NCS students, and that would apply to this student. Secondly, being an SEN student, financial support, professional support will also be available to the student.
We understand these NCS students are facing more difficulties than others. The policy is to allow them to be integrated into the mainstream education system as soon as possible. My question is, do you have offer any assistance for these students? You can say no. Just say no, if there isn't any. Apart from the 2 major support measures, we have no other plans for the time being. In that case, I would just want to say this. There are many NCS students who require special education programs, and they may not be able to get them in the private market. So I hope you would think again on how to better help these needy students. Maybe you can also follow up the issue in the education panel. Mr. Michael Tin, I've said this to the Education Bureau many times. NET teachers can provide an authentic linguistic environment to learners of English, and therefore every school should be provided with such teachers. It's about a budget of $400 million. I want to have this introduced to primary schools. The CE has been talking about enhancing English language proficiency. If we look at the TSA for primary 3, the passing rate has just gone up by 4%. For P6, just 2%. There's another round of assessment in December, costing $1.4 million on the effectiveness of NET teachers. I would like to know whether the employment of NET student, NET teachers will be helpful in enhancing TSA performance. But what would be the estimated effect of having one NET teacher, and what would be the additional effect if we have one more? In the review, we conduct a questionnaire survey on the support measures required. For example, school-based support measures and NET teachers, all these are covered in the questionnaire survey in the review. Mr. Michael Tin, nothing else? You haven't really responded to my question. My question is a focused one. I was asking specifically about NET teachers. We have been employing NET teachers for 10 years, while our performance in the TSA has not improved. Would it help to have one additional NET teacher in every school? Why haven't you covered this in your review? Well, we've been talking about other factors. Well, perhaps we can talk to the researcher about Mr. Tin's comments. Would you be covering TSA performance in your review? Yes or no? Dr. Chan? Well, the review is about the primary school NET teachers. Well, I just asked a question. What if we provide every school with one additional NET teacher? Would there be any improvement in TSA performance because of that? Are you going to look into that? Well, if we are to do that, we have to actually provide one additional NET teacher to some selected primary schools first. Miss Emily Lau. 3233, 032033, international schools. I'm on the business facilitation committee. Many experts and chambers of commerce have complained that there aren't sufficient international school places for the children. There's a table in EDB 033 in respect of number of students enrolled. 20,000 primary students have been enrolled, and 16,000 for secondary schools, and there are still some 2,000 vacancies. The fees can be as high as 200,000 for secondary schools and 170,000 for primary schools. And many locals would also like to be admitted to these students. I know that there's a cap of 30% on local students because you want to reserve more places for expats. Why can't our local schools be more like these international schools so that they are popular among parents and we don't have to take away places from expats? Well, international schools offer different curricula. Why can't we do that the same? Local schools are run on a local curriculum. So we're talking about different group of students who want to study in international schools. And non-local students have genuine needs for international school places. You talk about expectation management. I think parents expect that whatever educational curriculum the school is running, the children will get good education. So why can't we design our local curriculum in such a way that our schools, local schools, are popular as well? Now we have a situation whereby only those who can afford $200,000 in fees can get enrolled in international schools. Well, ideally, we would like to provide whatever our parents want. But there are other needs for local schools. We have to cater to such needs as well. So you agree that if we are willing to invest more in local schools, we can achieve such a desirable result. Well, I don't think that's what I said. Ms. Priscilla Leung, second round, 3 minutes. Concerning this year's examination, there's been some improvement. I've called some people, and they responded to my questions with scorns. Liberal study can be improved. You can do more to promote independent studies, independent study that can be improved. I know that some students have left the local system because they don't want to take this liberal studies subject. It's hard on students and also on teachers. So why don't you promote independent inquiry, study more widely? What the teacher needs to do is to help the student come up with a well-balanced inquiry study report. You want to encourage the adoption of multiple perspective and objective inquiry. You should provide the resources, work with teachers. You have to consider not just the wishes of teachers, but you have to find out what employers think. Some employers have said they don't want to employ local graduates. Well, employers all want our students to be well-trained and successful. You should ask the business sector and parents what they want. Parents are most concerned about their children's education. Please consider the case of IES. More resources should be given, and also the syllabus should be reduced. It's the questions that the teachers cannot really master so big a curriculum, and they have a hard time. Mr. Michael Tin, TSA in the past 10 years, TSA for English has registered a 1.9% improvement in performance. I'm not happy about that. Are you happy about that? As I've told some committee members on my bureau, we have to find out how our students are doing in English and how to express the proficiency level. Are you happy about the performance? I'm not. Are you happy? Our students are doing quite well. The basic proficiency has just improved by 1.9%. Do you think it's acceptable? Well, I think it's there's room for improvement. What plans have you got for that? I was about to say that this scholar will be working on this. I don't want to preempt their decisions. They have many important meetings scheduled. In the past 10 years, they have managed to improve the performance by 1.9%. Why still want to rely on them? I have to make comparisons before I can say whether we are really happy about the improvement. We have been employing net teachers for 10 years, and what we've achieved is an improvement of 1.9%. Well, I don't know whether this is really because of NET teachers. Well, why don't you conduct a study? Why don't you test out with some 10 schools, for example, provide them with an additional net teacher to see what can be done. You cannot just conduct one study after another. In the past, there was one net teacher for 2 schools, and now every school has one. So you want them to look into the possibility of providing one additional teacher. I think Dr. Chan has said that they may look into this. Yes, we'll look into this. And we'll also continue to assess student performance through TSA. I request a pilot study, select 10 schools, give them one more net teacher. All right, that's the end of the current session. The next session will start at 4:10.